I remember my dad telling the story. My dad, if you may remember, or if you recall my talking about him, was not a person of faith for quite a long period of time in his life. And yet one of the earliest stories that I remember him telling me about something spiritual actually had to do with a guardian angel that he felt that he had really encountered. And what's remarkable about this is, again, as I said, this was not someone who at that time was really a person of faith or who professed any kind of faith in Jesus. And he told the story of when he was in the Navy. They were in harbor somewhere, and he did, as most sailors do who get shore leave, they went into town. And if you've ever been in a strange town and you go from place to place, it's pretty easy to very quickly get disoriented and to wonder where you are. And now it was coming time when he had to find his ship. Now, since he was talking to me as a child, he did not disclose what his blood alcohol content was at this point, and I never thought to ask him that. But he was certainly disoriented, and he was alone, and he was afraid, and he had no idea where the ship was. And he finally resorted into having to ask someone, which can be very risky. And he asked a person, and they told him, "Go this way." And as he started walking, he noticed that that person very cautiously kind of went behind him along the way. And to also give all of the details of the story, this person was African American, and my dad at that point in his life really didn't have a lot of regard for African Americans. And yet, as he walked, this person kept a safe distance, so to speak, but kept coming along, leading my dad to wonder, am I walking into a trap where he's leading me to where his buddies are, that I get jumped, and he's the one to catch me if I try to run away? Because I'm sure that that kind of thing happens to sailors all the time too. And then, lo and behold, to my dad's relief, all of a sudden he caught sight of the ship and he knew where he was. And he turned to thank that individual, and they were gone. And he's like, I've no idea how they could have disappeared so quickly, and how they could have known that all of a sudden I knew where I was. And he just said, I've always looked at that as a guardian angel. And unfortunately, when I first heard that story, I wasn't young enough to point out, did you notice that the angel was black? Because that would have been a good thing for him to have heard for a time in his life. Thankfully, his story ends well, that he did come to Christ and that his prejudices were removed. For when you follow in Jesus' way, you will be changed. If you are not changed, then you are not following in the way of Jesus. Our scriptures today that we read in the New Testament come to us from the 14th chapter of John, and the passages from John 13 to John 17 are basically Jesus' last words to his disciples. It's the last chance to say whatever is on his heart. These are deep, passionate, heartfelt passages. This isn't just a college professor coming in and giving a lecture that they've given 100 times before. This is, you're given one last chance to say what you need and want to say to the people that you love dearly. And he takes full advantage of it. And he starts out by saying, don't let your heart be troubled. Why does he say that? Well, we need to back up into chapter 13 to get the understanding of that. For in chapter 13, we find that in the midst of Jesus' farewell address, he gives a new commandment to his disciples. For those of us who have ever wondered what Maundy Thursday means, the word Maundy comes from the Latin, which is the word of commandment. And it was on this night that Jesus gave the new commandment. And what was the new commandment? Love one another. The most important words that Jesus wants to get out are the words of love one another. He didn't say, have the same doctrine. He didn't say, think the same exact way. But what he did say is love one another. No sooner than he gives that comment, then he gives them very disturbing news. He says, I'm going away, and where I'm going, you cannot come. And as soon as Peter hears those words, Peter bluntly, boldly proclaims, Lord, nothing's going to keep me away from where you're going. I will follow you even to the point of death. And this is when Jesus says, you're going to deny me 3 times. Boom. And no sooner than he drops that line on Peter, then he says this, let not your heart be troubled. Powerful, powerful words. And he says, to not let your heart be troubled, believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. So he begins right away speaking about heaven. Well, heaven is a place where God dwells and where Jesus sits today at the right hand of the Father. Heaven is described elsewhere throughout Scripture as a kingdom, as an inheritance, as a country, as a city, and also as a home. In John 13:17, in this discourse of Jesus' last words to his disciples, he uses the word Father 53 times. According to Jesus, heaven is my Father's house. Have you ever tried to define what home is? Thanksgiving, how appropriate that we're kind of talking about home on Thanksgiving, because a lot of people go home on Thanksgiving. And a London newspaper ran a contest for give your best definition of home. And the winner was this description: home is a place where you are treated the best and complain the most. Poet Robert Frost said that home is the place that when you arrive there, they have to take you in. I like the words from the Irish rock band U2. They offer a very interesting perspective that may speak to some of our hearts. That home is hard to know what it is if you've never had one. Thankfully, we don't have to know what it is in order to know that one awaits us. Isn't it interesting that our Savior was, and still is, a carpenter? Jesus is at this moment in heaven building his church on earth. But Jesus is also in heaven at this moment building a home for the church in heaven. The Greek word that we see translated as the word mansions really isn't mansions. The Greek word is M-O-N-E, and it simply means rooms or abiding places. So I believe it to be a mistake of thinking of heaven as a place of neighborhoods or levels. If it were true, then it's a good thing that I've met Tina down here, because I never see her. She'd be in a high rent district, I'd be in the low rent district. But I think it's a mistake for us to think of heaven as a place of neighborhoods, that somehow in the love and the mystery and the goodness and grace of God, we are going to be one big and happy family. Did you notice the sincerity and the stark honesty of Jesus when he speaks about the reality of heaven? Jesus says very plainly, if it were any different, I would tell you. We can take Jesus at his words. Heaven is real. Heaven awaits us because of Jesus. And that Jesus not only shows us the way, he proclaims to us that he is the way. The early church in the first century had a collection of writings that they used as a supplement to their Bible. It is called the Didache. For those of you who take notes, D-I-D-A-C-H-E. And the Didache is known as the teaching of the Lord given to the Gentiles by the 12 apostles. And it's a very interesting collection of writings. But here, the opening words of the Didache, these are the opening words to the church given by the apostles. There are two ways. One is the way of life. The other is the way of death. And there is a mighty difference between these two ways. Powerful, powerful words that I'm sure that the apostles are remembering the words spoken to Moses, where God is saying, I am setting before you life or death. Choose life. And in the same way, Jesus is saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life. If you are choosing life, you choose me. You choose my way. One of the great words which is used to describe Jesus in the New Testament, found in the book of Hebrews, is translated as the word forerunner. It comes from the Greek word prodromos, and the two uses of this word illustrate the meaning of the forerunner. One use describes the Roman reconnaissance troops who would go ahead of the main body. They blazed the trail ahead so that the rest of the army could travel safely behind them in the way. And the second use has to do with a pilot boat that was used to go out and to meet the big freighters and to safely navigate them through the channels into harbor safely. Brothers and sisters, Jesus not only knows the way, Jesus is not only the way, but he has traveled the way. And our question before us this day is, have we placed our trust in him to guide and to lead us to safety and to home? My guardian angel story that I like to tell has to do when I was hiking in Germany on an unfamiliar trail, and daylight was fading. And my instructions said, keep walking till you come to a staircase, which when you're in the middle of the woods doesn't sound very informative or very helpful. And I was getting worried. And unfortunately, I came up to a little staircase that led to nothing. And I thought, is this the staircase that my map is telling me about? And as the dusk began to grow, lo and behold, 2 hikers came from the other direction. And remarkably, they spoke English. And I showed them my map, and I said, can you read this? Am I going in the right direction? And they read that, and they said, the good news is that you are. The bad news is you still have 5 kilometers to go. Which meant I knew it's going to be dark. And that in itself is a whole other story. But at least I knew I was on the right trail. At least I had heard from someone who had obviously come from that direction. And I'm here, right? So I obviously got to the end of the trail, and it was just as they said. I will never forget walking into that inn that night that was expecting me, and this nice German man with wrists about this big around, by the last name of Schreiner. I walk in and I just hear in this very heavy German accent, Mr. Johnston, I presume. Where have you been? And I snivel, I was in the woods all alone. It all went well. Did I mention that that inn had been receiving guests since 1355? It was a powerful thing. But you get the point that at times in our physical life, we need people who have been there, who have done that, who have pointed us in the way. So it is also in our spiritual life. And that Jesus, who has promised to never leave us, to never forsake us, to never stop loving us, has also said, I have blazed the trail. I am your forerunner. I have paved the way. Trust me. Follow me. A mansion met with many rooms in my presence awaits you.